Here are 8 of the best anti-meta decks you can build and play right now that have a good matchup into 3 of the biggest decks in the format. The best deck right now is definitively Dragapult EX, and I think all 8 of these decks can actually stand up and have a decent time into Dragapult. And if you're looking to play something a bit different, a bit more fun, and or has like weird alternate win conditions, you definitely got to check out this video and check out these 8 deck lists I provided. I'll leave a link to Limitless and Play.Limitless down below, the sites where I got the deck list from. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 23K subscribers over here. And without further ado, yeah, let's get into it. All right, starting things off here, I have Joltic Toolbox. Now, Joltic has done really good in online tournaments leading up to Monterey Regionals, and then it got top 8 at the tournament and had multiple placements within top 64. So this deck is definitely legit right now. What makes it so strong is the ability to use Joltic to power up an Iron Hands or a Pikachu EX very easily. You have a really good assortment of attackers to choose from with the Iron Hands, the Pikachu, you have Clefairy in the deck, Iron Leaves, Miraidon, Blood Moon or Saluna, even Mew and Fez can technically attack. You even play a Galvantula within the deck too. This is a very strong anti-meta deck right now because not a lot of decks really can respect Iron Hands, so really any deck that can abuse Iron Hands, I think is actually really good right now. The meta is fairly slow. We're in a format now where Budu Wars are very common, so any deck that can aggressively attack Budu and make your opponent have to sweat, this deck definitely does that really well, and I think those type of decks are very well positioned right now. Joltic and Friends is definitely a very powerful deck. I've done a video on it on the main channel, so if you want to go watch some gameplay of the deck in action and see how it works and what it's all about, definitely check out the main channel's recent video on the Joltic deck. But it's a very strong archetype. It has a good matchup into both Dragapult and Gardevoir, in my opinion. I think realistically, your worst matchup is going to be maybe like what Archaludon, if they have like a lot of Pikachu counters. But other than that, this deck is very powerful, and you definitely don't want to be sleeping on it because I think it definitely is on at the come up right now, as it did get top 8 at the Monterey Regional. So if you're somebody who's going to Milwaukee, definitely want to keep this deck on your radar. Flareon is a very scary deck to play against sometimes. So of course, Flareon has been doing pretty good at Regionals. We saw it almost get top 8 at Atlanta, but the deck hasn't really picked up enough popularity yet for me to call it like a super meta deck. Though I think this deck is a great anti-meta archetype. The idea of the deck is you have Flareon, which is one of your main attackers. It puts energy into play. The main goal of the deck, though, and the main gimmick is using Sylveon's Angel Light attack, which is a very deadly attack. When you're playing against a deck like Dragapult and you can set up the Sylveon, you can easily use Sylveon's Angel Light and put all those Dragapults back into the deck, resetting your opponent's board. Really good, too, versus archetypes that don't really respect the Sylveon. Something like Gardevoir, if they only have 2 Gardevoir in play, you can easily Angel Light both those back in the deck. There's a lot of really crazy plays you can make with Sylveon alone. Sylveon is like the main gimmick of the deck. Well, the deck does have the bit of a beat stick approach with the Flareon, the Clefairy, the Terapagos. The Sylveon is really what puts the deck together because it allows you to make some insane comebacks happen. This is definitely a deck you do not want to sleep on. It actually is starting to get picked up now by a lot more players, as we saw at Monterey Regionals, and I think that even going into Milwaukee, this deck will be fairly popular. It has a decent time versus both Dragapult and Goldengo, which are 2 of the top decks right now, and I think if you're taking a good matchup into those 2 decks, you're doing something right. So you definitely want to watch out for Flareon, Sylveon, as this deck definitely looks very scary, and it will probably be a pretty popular deck going forward if the deck can keep picking up steam. This one's a personal favorite of mine, but we got Enzor to talk about next. Now, Enzor has been doing okay at regionals, but hasn't really broken through anything crazy yet. I do think the deck, however, is in a decent spot right now, as truth be told, I think it actually has a good matchup versus the 3 big decks right now, Goldengo, Gardevoir, and Dragapult. One thing I really like about this deck is it actually beats Dragapult fairly consistently thanks to the help of Reshiram and Darmanitan being very aggressive towards Dragapult. Zoroark is one of the main draw engines in the format right now. A lot of decks are trying to adapt Zoroark into their deck. So having Zoroark as a draw engine is really good right now. You still have cards like Monkey Dory and Budu in the deck here. I actually also did a video on Zoroark quite recently, and also the Flareon deck I just looked at. So, I mean, I'm doing a lot of videos on these anti-meta decks for a reason, because I want to show off how good they are. But if you really do want to play a good anti-meta deck right now, that does have a good matchup versus both Dragapult and Gardevoir and Goldengo, you definitely got to try out Zoroark. It's a bit of a weird deck, though, because it doesn't really have, like, an insane high damage cap. And it's a bit more harder to pilot, especially as you are limited to what attackers you have, and you are limited to your resources. But when you can master the deck, you can learn all the lines and learn how the deck plays. I think you'll have a good time. And like I said, it does fairly consistently beat Dragapult and Gardevoir, in my opinion, and that's what makes it so strong. I think it's one of the more underrated sleeper decks in the format that not a lot of the top players have really looked at, mainly because maybe they just don't want to play it. But I think that if enough good players started playing this deck, we could start seeing it have even better performances than it's already getting. Roaring Moon to Dunspars just got 10th place at the Monche Regional Championships, and it's looking like one of the better anti-meta decks you can play right now. It's actually really interesting how Roaring Moon to Dunspars is popping back up, as this deck actually existed quite a while ago in the early days of the Temporal Forces format last year when we initially had the rotation, but now this deck is back in full force here and might pick up a little bit more popularity after its pretty good placement at the Monche Regionals. Your two main attackers are literally just the Baby Roaring Moon and the Roaring Moon EX. Being able to Frenzy Gouge anything is really good. Having Baby Moon as a good beat stick attacker is nice. The Dunspar Straw Engine is decent for this deck. Again, this archetype worked back in the day, so why not try it out again in this current standard format? I think one thing that the deck does do pretty nicely is the ability to control your board. You can always keep it a one-price board if you want with the Dunsparces and the Moons, or if you want to have that option to use a delete button on your opponent's active Pokemon, you do have the Roaring Moon EX. It is a bit harder to build up the Moon EX because there's no more Dark Patch, but the deck does play 2 copies of Energy Switch, which is what you can use to build up your Roaring Moon EX fairly consistently. The deck does play Fan Rodon, which is also a pretty good early game attacker and can get you all of your Dunsparces. Well, not your Dunsparces, but does get you those Dunsparces. Like I said, it allows you to set up your board really nicely. The ace pick of choice in the deck is that neutralization zone, which is definitely interesting to see in the deck. But like I said, not many decks play a lot of Stadium. Sometimes if you stick that neutralization zone in play, you might just win the game. And against Dragapult, for example, if your board is just Roaring Moon in the active and the Dunsparces on the bench, or whatever the case may be, or you can make your board literally just the one Roaring Moon if you want to clean up your board with Runaway Draw, you can do that, and you can make some really interesting plays happen with that neutralization zone to Dunsparce combo. But definitely a really cool deck, and I want to see it do better in the future for sure. Hydrogen's actually doing decent right now in online tournaments. I wanted to mention it in today's video, because if you can set up Obsidian, you are completely wiping your opponent's board very easily. Of course, Hydrogen has that powerful Obsidian attack, and it's a Dark type, and that ain't too shabby right now, as some decks really can struggle into Dark types, you know, Gardevoir, for example. Now, this build is the one that's been doing good in the online tournaments. Playing at the Pidgeot in the deck, has a couple Budu to slow your opponent down where you work towards Obsidian. Has Lily's Clefairy in there too for a little bit more aggression towards Dragapult. This deck might struggle slightly into Dragapult, but I feel like you can beat Dragapult if this deck sets up fast enough. If you get a quick Obsidian off, you should be able to run Dragapult over, so you can take out all their ghosts, you can take out all their Direct Cloaks and stuff. It's not too shabby. Hydrogen's a very scary card too. Even with that first attack, being able to do 200 damage and mill the top 3 cards can be very annoying to deal with. And like I said, being a Dark type right now ain't bad versus something like the Gardevoir EX deck. And even against Goldengo, I don't think it's terrible, as Obsidian or even Crash and Headbutt can run them out of resources fairly easily. Hydrogen's a really fun deck, and I mean, realistically, you can run your opponent over when you set up Obsidian, and I did want to mention it in today's video. The current world champion, Fernando Cifuentes, almost won a regional with Blissey, which is honestly kind of crazy because this deck is something that nobody really had on the radar. Blissey was getting a bit of talk going into rotation, but never really did anything, but Fernando decided to pull up to a regional with it and nearly won the tournament with it. One thing about this deck specifically that I like, I think it just farms Dragapult completely. Basically, the deck is all about tanking and spreading damage back with Monkey Dory. As you can see, this deck plays 4 Monkey Dory in it. It's also another deck with a Roaring Moon EX in it. Look at that. But yeah, Blissey with Monkey Dory is a very strong combo because Blissey has 300 HP. You slap a Rigid Band on it, it has effectively 330 HP, making that thing super tanky. Against a deck like Dragapult, where they're hitting you with Phantom Die for 200 damage, you can really deflect a lot of that damage back off with Monkey Dory, and you can take multi-prize KOs with Blissey. I also did a video on this deck on my channel, so you want to see even more gameplay of this deck in action, definitely check it out, because there's some really crazy plays you can make with Monkey Dory and Return. Blissey does 180 damage, unless you drop the 6 cards, which is really, really strong. You can do some really cool things with Monkey Dory and Blissey, because you can take extra prizes in a single turn if you get lucky. Now, of course, the deck does run Cornerstone Ogerpon. If you're playing against a deck like Goldengo, which usually tends to just run Blissey over, you can use the Cornerstone Ogerpon to be a bit of a tank. And of course, with the 4 Monkey Dories, you can easily make your board super unbreakable for the Cornerstone Ogerpon, and you can constantly heal it if your opponent is trying to deal with it. And of course, the Roaring Moon is a great option to have. Like I said, the ability to delete your opponent's active Pokemon isn't too bad. It's not hard to build up the Moon and the Cornerstone when you have Blissey's Happy Switch ability, which allows you to move around energy with its ability. So if you have a bunch of Blissey's in play, you can easily move around your energy as freely as you like. You can obviously do it to chain Adrenabrain on Monkey Dory, or of course you can build up the Moon or the Cornerstone if you need to use them in a pinch. Everybody loves watching and playing Frostlass, but nobody wants to play against it. But yeah, Frostlass has actually been doing fairly well right now at regionals and getting some pretty good placements at these tournaments, and I think it's a pretty solid time to play this deck. The gimmick of the deck, obviously, is you set up a bunch of Frostlass to spread a bunch of damage on the board right now against stuff like Dracloaks, Goldengos, or, Fez, Zork, anything like that. All the ability Pokemon to play, you punish your opponent for overcommitting to their abilities. You can punish them with Itchy Pollen, and of course, you have 4 Monkey Dory in the deck to deflect the damage. Monkey Dory does take damage from Frostlass, but you can also use Monkey Dory to move the damage back off. Very useful against stuff like Dragapult. This deck does play 2 TM Devos, so stuff like Gardevoir, Dragapult, and Goldengo, the 3 big decks right now, really are not safe against this high spread approach. Now, of course, there are some other sneaky plays you can make with the Maractus, which can trap your opponent with Corner, retreat lock the opponent while you're slowing them down via Freezing Shroud is very, very strong. And then the Blood Moon Ursaluna is also very useful in the late game. If your opponent is trying to play around a Frostlass by managing their bench, you could just come in and sweep them with Blood Moon, which is very, very powerful also in this archetype. It's a very fun deck to play, but like I said, nobody really likes playing against it because you constantly get spammed with damage counters and you are unable to usually play half of your deck because of Itchy Pollen. But this deck is fairly effective right now, and I think it's a pretty solid anti-meta deck. Honestly, it might be the most fun anti-meta deck in this video, if I'm going to be honest with you, but it's definitely one you got to keep your eye on, and I think Frostlass going forward is going to be good. There's another build of this deck using Espathra EX, which is also doing decent right now. The Espathra build is cool because it's a lot more useful into like different matchups, but this simple build of Frostlass, I think, is also very strong, and you can try out either the Espathra or the simple build if you really wanted to. All right, don't worry. This is the last Roy Moon deck in today's video. But yeah, I wanted to mention Poison and Moon real quick. The Poison package with Roy Moon seems to be pretty powerful because, of course, doing some extra damage with the baby Pekron, while also having Frenzy Gouging is really good. Pekron can take out the little guys, where Roy Moon EX can take out the big guys, which is what I like about this deck. And, of course, you can always get those cheap little donks. This deck did win, the first major online tournament in the rotation format, and this build I'm looking at did win a big online tournament also. So it's definitely a really unique deck for sure on how it approaches Roaring Moon. I think both the Dunspar build and this Poison build both do different things. Obviously, the Dunspar build is a bit more consistent because you have the Dunsparces, you have a little bit more board control. This build is a little bit more aggressive. It does play 4 Pokemon catchers, so bringing back the catchers, trying to guss stuff up and take cheap KOs where possible with either Petron or the Moon EX. You could also add the Baby Moon into the deck if you want, also to make the deck have another 1-prize attacker. Having 4 Perilous Jungle makes your deck even deadlier with the poison damage. Of course, Brute Bonnet is a very powerful card alongside Petron, but you can use Brute Bonnet also with Roaring Moon if you want for Calamity Storm in some very interesting situations. But yeah, this deck is fairly interesting, and I want to see a little bit more of it, and I think that playing Moon right now isn't bad. I mean, being a dark deck, like I said, isn't terrible right now, and a deck this aggressive can beat down decks like Dragapult and Gardevoir that maybe play a bit more slower or can't really keep up with the aggression from Moon and Petron combined. But there you go, folks. Those are 8 of the best anti-meta decks you can build and play right now in the standard format. Of course, as we approach Milwaukee, maybe we'll see even more decks pop up, or even post-Milwaukee, we'll see even more decks here. But let me know what you think of the anti-meta decks. Which one is your favorite? Let me know in the comment section below. If you're new to the second channel, make sure to subscribe. We are on the road, once again, to 23,000 subscribers. I'll leave a link to Limitless and Play at Limitless down below, the site where I got all of the deck lists for today's video from. And yeah, I'll catch y'all later. Have a good day, and bye-bye.